What's going on? YouTube. Listen up, young elder gang. This is Shoeshine Joe at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Fam, I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth, keep in mind this. Content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button. Young Elder Gang, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. The so-called white people were the first real slaves. They lie and try to switch places with the Nubians to change and hide the real history. The Moors started slavery in 900 BC, where they enslaved pale, white people from the Caucasus Mountain. The Caucasus Mountain is a mountain range at the intersection of Asia and Europe. Stretching between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, they are surrounded by the Caucasus region and are home to Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe at 5,642 meters above sea level. They started kidnapping white women at first and selling them as pets to rich Moors. Then about in 800 BC, they start kidnapping the white men and training them to be mercenaries. A mercenary is a soldier who participates in an armed conflict for personal profit rather than for political or ideological reasons. They are typically outsiders to the conflict, not members of any official military, and their primary motivation is payment. The term can also be used more broadly to describe someone motivated by greed or self-interest. The dirty Moors would use the mercenaries against other Moors. They would put the white women they captured in harems and sell them as sex slaves. A harem is a part of a Muslim palace or house historically reserved for women, including wives, concubines, daughters, and female servants. It served to seclude women from unrelated men. In Moorish history, particularly during the time of the Almoravids in Al-Andalus, Muslim Iberia, harems housed enslaved women who served as concubines. These women, often captured from non-Muslim territories like Christian northern Spain or non-Muslims in Africa, were sometimes integrated into the household and could even give birth to the ruler's children. Some concubines, particularly those who became mothers of rulers, gained influence and played significant roles within the harem and even in political affairs. It is important to note that the term harem in this historical context refers to a system of female seclusion and frequently concubinage involving white enslaved women. This is distinct from modern understandings of prostitution or consensual sexual relations. The historical practice of concubinage was tied to the institution of slavery, where white enslaved women were often acquired through warfare or the slave trade. Islamic law did not prohibit sex with enslaved white women, but it did provide some rights and protections for those who bore children with their masters. This is how they got in. From 1492 to 1607, the devil built his way up to come to the Western Hemisphere. The Moors in Britain established various colonies in Australia, British Honduras, now Belize, British Guiana, now Guyana, several Caribbean islands such as Barbados, Jamaica, and the British Virgin Islands. Britain Moors colonized many countries throughout Africa, including major ones like South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya. Britain's presence expanded during the Scramble for Africa in the late 1800s. British colonies were found in East, North, Southern, Central, and West Africa. Examples include countries like South Africa, Botswana, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Gambia. Many of these former British territories are now independent nations, some of which are part of the Commonwealth of Nations. In 1607, they set up the first business colony in North America. For 108 years, the European Moors worked hard to build up their businesses. By the 1715, they had 12 businesses, colonies in the North America and other places around the world. The work had become backbreaking for the European Moors. They tried enslaving the natives by prisoners of war to make them work the land, but they would escape and run away. They were hard to catch. Plus, the natives would fight back. The European Moors were becoming restless. They needed someone else to work the land. So in 1715, they came up with the bright idea to send so-called white convicts to these businesses, colonies, and work them as slaves. At this time, England is a land of contrasts, rolling green fields and bustling city streets, but also shadows lurking in every alleyway. King George I, the Moor, sits on the British throne of the Moorish Empire, presiding over a nation in turmoil. His prisons are overflowing, packed with white convicts. Some thieves, poachers, debtors, and anyone who crossed the wrong noble. The cells are so crowded that prisoners sleep standing up, pressed together in the darkness. Disease and despair fester in these jails, spreading rapidly among the weak and malnourished. The stench is overwhelming, and the cries of the desperate echo through the stone corridors. The cost of maintaining these prisons is draining the treasury and threatening public health. Yet the courts keep sending more people in, day after day, with little mercy. There's nowhere for them to go, and the problem grows worse with every sentence handed down. The government is desperate. They need a solution fast. The pressure mounts as officials debate what to do with the swelling ranks of the condemned. Letting everyone out would mean chaos in the streets, an explosion of crime like murder, rape, and unrest that could threaten the very stability of the crown and the civil people in England. So they look to the map, searching for an answer beyond their shores. The American colonies, vast, rugged, and in desperate need of labor to build and work at the new businesses they had set up. Why let convicts rot in cells when they could be sent across the ocean to build an empire abroad? Who cares about what happens to the Native Americans when we release our worst killers and rapists onto their land? The idea is both practical and ruthless. It's a cold calculation: exile the unwanted, stabilize the crown, and fuel colonization expansion with forced labor. It's like killing two birds with one stone. This decision triggers one of history's largest forced migrations, uprooting millions of so-called whites from their homes and sending them into the unknown. These aren't willing convicts and poor immigrants, they're human cargo, punished for crimes as small as stealing bread or poaching a rabbit to feed their families. Sentenced to transportation, they're chained together, marched through jeering crowds, and loaded onto ships bound for a future of hard labor in a strange new world. Their lives are traded for the growth of the colonies, their freedom sacrificed to fuel the ambitions of an empire, a new world order. I guess you can say it's better than take him out back and stone him. The system solves one problem by creating a new, harsher reality, one where survival is uncertain and hope is a distant memory. The phrase "King George I," the Moor said, "I have flushed the toilets of Great Britain onto America," is a metaphor for the white convicts kicking out a large-scale criminal of Britain to the United States of America in 1715. King George made this statement before Fidel Castro. This is your real slave trade, and the slave trade about Nubians or so-called black dark people being slaves is a big lie. The story was reversed, and the historians switched so-called black people out with white people. The white people were the first slaves. Britain's prisons were clogged, so the colonies became the dumping ground. Between 1715 and 1868, about 162,000 convicts were transported from Great Britain and Ireland to various penal colonies in Australia. Between 1715 and 1776, about 150,000 convicts were transported to the Americas by the Moors. Between 1715 and 1900, about 1 million convicts were transported to Africa by the Moors. Another million were transported as white slaves to these places. The Transportation Act of 1718 made it official. White convicts became His Majesty's 7-year passengers. Tens of thousands, white men, women, and children, were shipped to America and other places. Upon arrival, they were sold at auction, inspected like livestock, and put to work. The journey was brutal. Many died before even reaching shore. Those who survived faced years of grueling labor, often never seeing freedom. Before they started enslaving the natives as prisoners of war to work their own land, white convict labor powered the colonies, businesses. These white people were the original disposable workforce, overlooked but central to USA Corporation's foundation. Their suffering built the early economy. Their story is rarely told, but it shaped the nation. Their bondage was real, and their legacy deserves recognition. They were the real slaves, and have been taught lies all their life by the Moors that they were the slave masters. Here's a twist you won't find in most textbooks. While we often hear about white European powers shaping the colonial world, the European Moors were the real free white people in status. The Moors are the real European powers shaping the colonial world, using and lying to the pale man, who is now calling themselves white people. The overseers and merchants who managed white convict labor in the colonies actually were Moors from European, North Africa, and traced their roots back to the Ottoman Empire. The Moors cracked the whip on the white convicts. These Moors brought with them not only their own customs and traditions, but also a very different perspective on authority and servitude. For centuries, their societies had been organized around strict hierarchies, where status, not skin color, was the main factor that defined who held power and who served. This was a sharp contrast to the emerging racial divisions in Europe and the Americas. In the colonies, this created a complex and sometimes confusing social structure. White convicts didn't like answering to Moorish European masters and often found themselves under the authority of Moorish overseers, who enforced discipline and managed labor with their own set of rules. The Moors broke the white convicts' back, working them day and night. This dynamic upended traditional Moorish European notions of Moorish superiority and fueled resentment among both the white convicts and their overseers, the Moors. The colonies turned into plantations, and plantations turned into prisons for profit, private-owned prisons. The presence of these powerful outsiders challenged the social order and created new tensions. The power structure in these colonies wasn't simply black and white. It was Moors are the masters and the poor whites and white convicts were servants and slaves for the Moorish crown. The Moors treated them dirty. The Moors were prison wardens. A prison warden is the highest-ranking official at a correctional facility, responsible for the overall management and operation of the prison. They oversee all aspects of the prison's security, administration, and programs, ensuring the safety and well-being of both staff and inmates. Wardens are in charge of maintaining a safe and secure environment within the prison, including implementing security procedures, managing security staff, and responding to emergencies. They manage the prison's budget, allocate resources, and oversee all administrative functions, including personnel management, maintenance, and record-keeping. Wardens recruit, train, supervise, and evaluate correctional officers and other staff members, ensuring they adhere to regulations and policies. They are responsible for the care, custody, and control of inmates, including assigning them to housing units, overseeing their activities, and ensuring they receive necessary services. The wardens became governors, prisoners became wards of the state, and the state became prison. The Moors dogged the white convicts out, layered, shifting, and often tense, with alliances and rivalries constantly evolving. Some Moors who were overseers and cracked the whip hard on their white slaves and subjects. Their business, plantation colony, was hitting the numbers for the crown's returns and payout. But when it came time for the crown to pay the overseers their cut, it was short. Some Moors who were overseers and officials felt like they were being hustled by the crown, King George I. They wanted answers to why their cut was short. Meanwhile, it was short because another group of Moors, called the Moorish Zionist guys, wanted to cut the crown out of the deal. So they started sabotaging the Bank of England using their front family, the Rothschilds. Some of the most influential Moorish figures even maintained harems, forcing white women, often convicts themselves, into sexual slavery. The Moors set up harems in New York Colony first as a business. This was a brutal reality that added another layer of exploitation to an already harsh system. These women were doubly exploited, treated as both laborers and property, their lives controlled by the Moors who held power over them. The reality of colonial servitude was far more disturbing and complex than the simplified stories were often told in reverse. It was a world where power was controlled by the European power and their crown in unexpected ways, and suffering was widespread. The presence of Moorish overseers added a volatile and unpredictable element to colonial society, making it a place of constant negotiation and unrest. It was a powder keg of shifting allegiances, deep exploitation, and simmering conflict, one that could erupt at any moment. This untold chapter of history forces us to rethink who truly held power in the colonies, and how that power was wielded, challenged, and ultimately transformed the world we know today. The word slave carries a heavy and profound meaning, resonating through history with a weight that is often underestimated. Its roots, however, delve much deeper than most people realize, tracing back to a time and place that shaped its very essence. The term originates from Slav, referring to the Slavic white peoples of Eastern Europe. Slave is Slavic, which can't apply to Native Africans or Native Americans. It only applies to people from Russia and Germany. These communities were subjected to enslavement for centuries, a fate that left an indelible mark on their identity and history. Throughout history, various groups, including the African Vikings and Ottomans who were Moors, captured and sold Slavs across Europe and the Middle East. This widespread practice turned their name into a synonym for bondage and servitude. The association of their name with bondage was not just a linguistic evolution, but a reflection of the harsh realities they endured. For much of history, white slavery transcended race and ethnicity. It was primarily about power dynamics and the circumstances individuals found themselves in. In those times, anyone could become a slave if they lost a war or fell out of favor with those in power. Native Americans and Native Africans are falsely called slaves but were really prisoners of war. Slavery by way of prisoner of war refers to the historical practice of enslaving captured enemy combatants during times of conflict. In ancient times, captured warriors were often considered the personal property of the captor and were forced into a life of slavery. It was a fate that could befall anyone, regardless of their background. By the 1700s, the British society viewed class and social status, not skin color, as the primary indicators of who could be enslaved. This perspective shaped their approach to servitude. The white convicts sent to America were part of this long-standing tradition of servitude, illustrating how deeply ingrained these practices were in society. Their servitude was not an anomaly, rather it was a continuation of centuries-old practices that had been established long before. Referring to them as slaves is not merely dramatic, it is historically accurate, reflecting the realities of their conditions and the terminology of the time. Plus, the origin from the area of Asia. This complex history reminds us that so-called lax slavery is a cover-up for the real truth on how the Moors did the white people, the pale man. White slavery has been a part of numerous Moorish cultures throughout time. The lines between free and unfree were always shifting for whites in a Moorish society, often blurring in ways that affected countless lives. Understanding the origin of the word slave offers us a new lens through which to view the past, challenging us to reconsider the narratives we have inherited or been told to cover up the truth. Not all forced laborers were convicts, many were indentured servants. On paper, it sounded like a chance work for a set term, then earn freedom and land. In reality, it was a cruel bait and switch. Indentured servants were bought, sold, and punished as convicts. Contracts could be extended for minor infractions or pregnancy, trapping white people for years. Many never survived to see freedom. Disease, overwork, and abuse were rampant. For European Moorish masters, it was cheaper to work white servants to death and buy new ones. White women faced even harsher realities, including sexual exploitation and extra years of servitude for childbirth. The system was rigged. White servants were disposable, their humanity erased. The promise of a new life was mostly an illusion. Indenture was a gamble where the house always won. The cycle of debt and despair was nearly impossible to escape. For most, freedom was just out of reach for the pale man. America was the Moors from Britain's first penal colony experiment. Georgia, for example, was founded for convicts who were debtors and the poor white folks. But the dream of a fresh start quickly gave way to plantation reality, fueled by white convicts and poor white laborers. The Moors made white people pick cotton and farm tobacco, all to sock it to the crown of England and the popes of Rome pockets. When the American Revolution closed colonial ports to America, white convicts kept piling in. Prisons back home in England were overflowed again. They start housing them on old ships. These temporary solutions of housing prisoners on rotting ships failed. The Moors from Britain needed a new dumping ground to flush their bad apples on. Enter Australia, remote, vast, and ready for colonization. In 1788, the first fleet arrived and New South Wales became the new penal colony. The same harsh system was transplanted: forced labor, brutal discipline, and exile. Convicts built the foundations of modern Australia under Moorish military guard. The penal colony pipeline was a tool of the Moorish Empire, first in America, then in Australia, Africa, and the islands. The legacy of forced migration and labor is etched into both nations. The Moorish Empire's reach was built on the backs of Moors imprisoning people. The system was brutal but effective for imperial ambitions. While the Moors in Britain shipped its white convicts abroad, another slave trade thrived: the Barbary slave trade. For centuries, Moors from North Africa, who were called pirates, raided European coasts. capturing over 1 million white people for slave markets. White men became galley slaves. White women and children faced domestic servitude or sexual exploitation, conditions where horrific escape was rare and ransom, bail, was often the only hope. This trade shaped European fears and led to the creation of powerful navies. The term white slavery originally referred to this phenomenon. The Barbary Moors captured over 6.6 million white people within a 500-year span between 1400 to 1900. The Barbary Moor slave trade was the real Atlantic slave trade. Forgetting the Barbary slave trade erases a crucial part of the global story of slavery. Moorish Europeans were perpetrators, and white people were the victim in this brutal system. 60 years had gone by since the first white convicts were dumped off in America. It was 1773, and the white convicts and poor whites began to protest against the Crown in England. They wanted out of the rigged contracts. After the white convicts from Europe would work for usually 4 to 7 years on a work release program for the Moors, they were supposed to be set free. A work release program allows certain inmates to leave prison or jail during the day to work at an approved job, returning to the correctional facility at the end of their shift. From 1776 to 1885, prisons in America were mostly filled with white convicts and criminals, with the first major prison not being created until 1785. When the Moors brought these white convicts and poor white people to America, they filled them with broken promises. The poor whites, the Moors charged them heavy-duty money to get over to America, which they didn't have at the time. So, the ticket was for the labor in return to the Crown, which should have taken them only 3 to 4 years to pay off, but after additional fees, they were locked in for another 7 years. The white convicts were supposed to be released, but the Moors kept giving them bad contracts, and they would be locked into another 7-year deal as indentured servants to the Crown. This went on from 1715 until 1773. In 1773, the white convicts and poor whites, with the help of some Moorish overseers, wardens, who weren't getting their cut, rose up, got mad, and started a rebellion against the Moors in Great Britain and King George I, the Moor, so they wanted to break free. They started the American Revolution in 1775. The American Revolution was a colonial rebellion and war of independence in which the 13 colonies, made of mostly criminals, broke from Moorish British rule to form the United States of America. In the years before 1776, the American colonies simmered with unrest not just among the elite Moorish government, but among Moorish overseers who wasn't getting their promise cut. White convicts and white servants who outnumbered the Moors' wardens became fed up. For them, the revolution was about breaking their own chains, not just taxes or tea. Many saw the rhetoric of liberty as a call for personal emancipation. The fight against Moors in Britain became a fight against their immediate oppressors, often Moorish overseers. Independence meant a chance to tear up indentures and claim freedom. These dispossessed people became the muscle of the revolution. The war was as much a class rebellion as a quest for national independence. Their struggle for freedom reshaped the meaning of the revolution. The revolution culminated in the American Revolutionary War, which was launched on April 19, 1775, in the battles of Lexington and Concord. Once they thought they had the Moors off their back, then the convicts turned their evil energy on the Native Americans. Now remember, the king said he couldn't let these guys out in England. Letting these white convicts out would mean chaos in the streets, an explosion of crime like murder, rape, and unrest that could threaten the very stability of the Crown and the civil people in England. Well, what do you think happened to the Native Americans? Once the Moors, bringing white convicts to America, failed, and they supposedly got ran off, these convicts then turned their attention on the natives, and there was major chaos in the land. An explosion of crime like murder, rape, and unrest on the Native Americans fueled a new way of life. Meanwhile, the Moorish crown tricked them into thinking they were free. The money they borrowed to go to war with the Moors in Britain, they had to pay back to the same guys, locking them back into a 30 to 40-year bankrupt deal with the crown. Keep in mind, the majority of inmates in American prisons are considered violent or person-to-person criminals. Many are repeat offenders, and a substantial percentage have been convicted of violent offenses. Just imagine a whole bunch of rapists and murderers being set free to roam and do crimes. Well, this is what happened to the Native Americans. Once the Moors dropped off white convicts and then left them on the Native Americans. All hell broke loose. So what do we do with this story that complicates everything we thought we knew? It challenges the simple narrative of white colonists and black slaves, revealing a true system of servitude. It really was Moorish, European colonizers and white slaves. Early America was a landscape of exploitation where class often mattered more than race. The white experience was far from monolithic. Class and circumstance shaped lives. This history isn't about replacing one story with another, but adding depth, complexity, and revealing the truth for once and for all. It reminds us that history is messy, layered, and always being re-examined. By uncovering forgotten stories, we get a fuller, more honest picture of the true past. And it forces us to ask, what other stories remain untold and have been rewritten to hide the truth? They created the Native America slave narrative after the Civil War. They pay and force so-called black preachers and so-called black government officials to promote this narrative. And they get a cut and kickback from the Moorish crown and the popes of Rome. They reclassified Native Americans as blacks, Negroes, and colored. Then they imported foreigners to act like they were the Native Americans while the dirty Moors steal the land.